She is insane. I have a signed lease right here. She is trespassing. Arrest her. The red and blue police lights flash in a dizzying rhythm across the white pillars of my front porch. Julian waves a crumpled piece of paper at two Westport police officers, his face flushed an ugly shade of red. He is sweating right through his jacket, his voice cracking loud enough to echo down toward the Long Island Sound. To understand why 3 moving trucks are currently being impounded by the county sheriff and why my sister's boyfriend is shaking on my driveway, you have to rewind. You have to go back to a Sunday dinner. I am Kaylee Collins. I am 35 years old. Welcome to Pana Vengeance, where we tell true stories about women who use silence and strategy to protect what they earned. If you have ever dealt with family members who mistake your kindness for weakness, tell me your age in the comments and hit subscribe. You will want to stay for this one. I work as a senior actuary. My entire career is built on calculating risk, anticipating disaster, and constructing mathematical safety nets. I thrive in controlled environments. My home in Connecticut is exactly that. It is a coastal colonial property I purchased with 12 years of corporate bonuses. It belongs to me. The custom mahogany dining table seats 12. The tall sash windows open out to the water, letting in the clean scent of Atlantic salt. But on this particular Sunday night, that ocean breeze is losing a turf war against the synthetic musk of Julian's cologne. He sits halfway down my table, swirling a glass of my reserve wine. Next to him is my younger sister, Blair. She is 25. She is wearing a silk blouse she pulled from my closet without asking, her shoulders squared and tense. Across from them sit Richard and Helen Pierce, Julian's parents. They arrived on Friday for what Blair promised would be a quick, polite weekend introduction. The roast chicken sits, half-eaten, on bone china plates. The only sound in the room is the rhythmic ticking of my late father's antique grandfather clock out in the foyer. Blair sets her fork down. The silver clinks against the porcelain, sharp and loud. "Kaylee," she begins. Her tone takes on a rehearsed, fragile edge. "Julian and I have been talking. The commute from his apartment is draining him, and his parents just finalized the sale of their condo." I take a sip of my water. I keep my gaze level. I see. So Blair continues, lifting her chin. The fragility vanishes. Starting tomorrow, Julian, Richard, and Helen are moving in here permanently. They will take the master suite and the guest wing. The room holds its breath. Julian leans back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Helen reaches over and pats Blair's hand, playing the role of the supportive mother. "This house is big enough for family," Blair says. Her eyes narrow into a flat, unyielding stare. "You rattling around in this giant place alone is depressing. We are bringing life back into it. If you have a problem with that setup, you can move out." The grandfather clock ticks out 3 slow seconds. A normal person might scream. A normal person might throw their wine glass, demand the guests leave the property, or launch into a bitter tirade about property taxes and basic respect. But I am an actuary. When a localized flood threatens a structure, you do not yell at the water, you build a channel. I pick up my linen napkin and dab the corner of my mouth. I look at Blair, I look at Julian. I look at the expectant faces of his parents who are already measuring my dining room with their eyes. I let a slow, quiet smile pull at my lips, but I do not let it reach my eyes. "Enjoy your dessert," I whisper. I push my chair back. The wood scrapes softly against the Persian rug. I turn my back on the table and walk out the front door, leaving them to their victory toast. They thought my silence was a surrender. They had no idea I was already drafting their ruin. The gravel crunches beneath my heels as I walk away from the front porch. The night air off the Sound is biting, carrying the sharp scent of wet pine and salt. Behind me, the warm yellow light spilling from the dining room windows frames a picture of stolen victory. I can see the silhouettes of Julian and his parents raising their glasses. They are celebrating the easiest real estate acquisition of their lives. They think I am retreating to the detached carriage house to cry into a pillow. They do not understand how an actuary processes a threat. I unlock the heavy oak door of the carriage house and step into the dark. I do not reach for the light switch. I stand in the quiet shadows, letting the adrenaline metabolize. My pulse is steady. My hands do not shake. People often mistake my composure for weakness, assuming that because I do not scream, I do not care. They are wrong. My restraint is a learned discipline. 7 years ago, I sat in a glass-walled boardroom in downtown Stamford, watching a junior analyst panic over a cascading market failure. The numbers on the screen were flashing red, signaling millions in projected losses. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the urge to react, to plug the holes, to fight the data. My senior mentor, a silver-haired veteran of corporate risk, placed a hand flat on the polished conference table. He did not raise his voice. He watched the red numbers plummet with detached fascination. In risk management, you do not stop a flood, he told me, his voice a low, steady hum against the chaos of the trading floor. You build a channel and you let the flood drown your competitors. You let the water do the work. That philosophy became the bedrock of my career. It is why I excel at quantifying ruin. It is why I am paid to look at catastrophic loss and find the mathematical pivot point. You do not fight the current. You step aside, redirect the momentum, and watch the threat wash itself away. Flipping the dining room table tonight would have been fighting the flood. Screaming at Blair would have generated noise, and manipulators thrive on noise. Julian wants a screaming match. He wants me to look unstable, irrational, and cruel so he can justify his invasion to anyone who will listen. I will not give him a single drop of ammunition. Instead, I pull out my phone, the screen casting a pale blue glow in the dark carriage house. I need to review the variables. I need to understand how the perimeter was breached in the first place. The fatal variable was grief. 14 months ago, the foundation of my controlled world cracked. A rainy Tuesday afternoon on Interstate 95, a distracted driver crossing the median. In the span of a single phone call from a state trooper, I lost both my mother and my father. The Westport estate, which I had purchased as a sanctuary for us, suddenly turned into a mausoleum. The 5,000 square feet of coastal colonial architecture felt cavernous. Every room held a ghost. My father's reading glasses left on the side table, my mother's gardening gloves sitting on the mudroom bench. I managed the funeral, I signed the paperwork, I chose the caskets. I functioned because someone had to. Blair, on the other hand, shattered. She was 24 at the time, working a string of part-time retail jobs and living in a cramped apartment downtown. She had always been sheltered, shielded from financial realities by my parents' quiet generosity. Without them, she was unmoored. The calls started a week after the burial, Blair weeping into the phone at 2 a.m, saying the silence of her apartment was suffocating her. She claimed her mental health was fraying, that she could not sleep, could not eat, could not bear to be alone. Guilt is a powerful solvent. It dissolves boundaries faster than anything else. Driven by a misplaced sense of sisterly duty, a desperate need to fix her pain, and a quiet hope that her presence might warm the echoing halls of the estate, I made the worst calculation of my life. I told Blair to pack her bags. I offered her the guest wing rent-free. For the first few months, the arrangement felt like a delicate truce. We navigated our shared sorrow by avoiding it. We drank tea on the back patio. We watched mindless television. I paid for the groceries, the utilities, the property taxes, and the maintenance. I asked for nothing in return except respect for the peace I was trying to rebuild. The anchor of that peace was my father's antique grandfather clock. It stands in the main foyer, a towering structure of oiled walnut and polished brass. My father used to wind it every Sunday morning. After he died, I took over the ritual. The steady, rhythmic ticking of that brass pendulum became the heartbeat of the house. It was a mechanical promise that time was moving forward, that order persisted despite the chaos of the world outside. When I sat in my study late at night, running complex statistical models on my monitors, the sound of the clock reaching through the floorboards grounded me. It was a measure of safety. Then Julian Pierce entered the equation. Blair met him at a local bar. He introduced himself to me a few weeks later as a freelance digital entrepreneur. In my industry, you learn to read a person's resume in their posture, their shoes, and their eye contact. Julian wore a watch that cost more than his car, and his eyes darted around my foyer not with admiration, but with calculation. He did not see a family home mourning a loss. He saw an unmined gold rush. The invasion began with microscopic boundary tests. A weekend visit here, a Sunday brunch there. At first, he was polite, overly charming, always offering to pour the wine. But I watched his eyes. I watched him run his hands over the imported Italian marble of the kitchen island. I watched him casually ask about the neighborhood zoning laws and the property tax rates, under the guise of making conversation. Soon, weekend visits bled into Monday mornings. I would leave for the corporate office before dawn, and when I returned after a grueling 12-hour shift, Julian's luxury sports car would be parked in my designated garage bay. His expensive sneakers began piling up by the front door. His shaving cream appeared on the marble counter of the guest bathroom. He was testing the perimeter. Every time I stayed silent to keep the peace with Blair, he took another inch. Blair defended him relentlessly. Whenever I gently suggested Julian spend a few nights back at his own apartment, she would twist her face into a mask of betrayal. She accused me of trying to isolate her, claiming Julian was the only person pulling her out of her depressive episodes. She weaponized our parents' death, stating that Mom and Dad would have wanted this house to be filled with love, not cold corporate silence. So I retreated. I swallowed the discomfort. I prioritized my sister's fragile emotional state over my own spatial boundaries. But parasites do not stop when they are full. They stop when the host is entirely consumed. The subtle disrespect began to escalate. The quiet evenings by the fire were replaced by Julian blasting podcasts through the surround sound system. The clean scent of the house was buried under his cologne, and the smell of the cheap cigars he smoked on the terrace. The steady, comforting tick of the grandfather clock was drowned out by the noise of a man claiming territory he did not earn. Julian was no longer a guest. He was acting like the man of the house, and he was doing it on my dime. The true nature of his entitlement, however, did not reveal itself in the living room or the kitchen. It revealed itself in the one place I expressly forbade him from entering: my private home office, the room where I housed corporate documents, client portfolios, and the quiet sanctuary of my professional life. Tomorrow morning, I would wake up to find that boundary not just crossed, but entirely obliterated, and the discovery waiting for me in the trash can would give me the exact leverage I needed to start building the channel for the flood. The gravel crunches beneath my heels as I walk away from the front porch. The night air off the sound is biting, carrying the sharp scent of wet pine and salt. Behind me, the warm yellow light spilling from the dining room windows frames a picture of stolen victory. I can see the silhouettes of Julian and his parents raising their glasses. They are celebrating the easiest real estate acquisition of their lives. They think I am retreating to the detached carriage house to cry into a pillow. They do not understand how an actuary processes a threat. I unlock the heavy oak door of the carriage house and step into the dark. I do not reach for the light switch. I stand in the quiet shadows, letting the adrenaline metabolize. My pulse is steady, my hands do not shake. People often mistake my composure for weakness, assuming that because I do not scream, I do not care. They are wrong. My restraint is a learned discipline. 7 years ago, I sat in a glass-walled boardroom in downtown Stamford, watching a junior analyst panic over a cascading market failure. The numbers on the screen were flashing red, signaling millions in projected losses. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the urge to react, to plug the holes, to fight the data. My senior mentor, a silver-haired veteran of corporate risk, placed a hand flat on the polished conference table. He did not raise his voice. He watched the red numbers plummet with detached fascination. In risk management, you do not stop a flood, he told me, his voice a low, steady hum against the chaos of the trading floor. You build a channel, and you let the flood drown your competitors. You let the water do the work. That philosophy became the bedrock of my career. It is why I excel at quantifying ruin. It is why I am paid to look at catastrophic loss and find the mathematical pivot point. You do not fight the current. You step aside, redirect the momentum, and watch the threat wash itself away. Flipping the dining room table tonight would have been fighting the flood. Screaming at Blair would have generated noise, and manipulators thrive on noise. Julian wants a screaming match. He wants me to look unstable, irrational, and cruel so he can justify his invasion to anyone who will listen. I will not give him a single drop of ammunition. Instead, I pull out my phone, the screen casting a pale blue glow in the dark carriage house. I need to review the variables. I need to understand how the perimeter was breached in the first place. The transition from weekend visitor to permanent resident happened in the shadows. It was a slow, calculated creep. Julian never formally asked to move in. He never offered to sign a lease, pay a utility bill, or contribute to the property taxes. He just slowly expanded his footprint, leaving his belongings behind, like markers of conquered territory. It was a Friday evening in late October when the facade of the polite guest shattered. I had just wrapped a grueling 60-hour week at the firm. We were modeling the financial fallout of a regional supply chain collapse for a major shipping client. My brain was a tangled web of algorithms and liability projections. The drive back to Westport is usually my decompression chamber. I listen to the hum of the tires on the asphalt and envision stepping into the quiet sanctuary of my home. I walk through the front door, dropping my keys into the silver bowl on the console table. My shoulders are tight, aching from days hunched over dual monitors. I close my eyes, waiting for the familiar, steady rhythm of my father's antique grandfather clock. It is a sound that grounds me, a mechanical heartbeat that signifies order. Instead of the rich, metallic tick of the brass pendulum, I hear a jarring sequence of digital explosions and synthetic gunfire echoing from the living room. I step into the foyer. The grandfather clock stands in the corner, silent and dark. The thick black power cord which powers the internal light and keeps the winding mechanism synchronized lies coiled on the Persian rug like a dead snake. I trace the path of the nearest wall outlet. Plugged into the socket is a glowing neon power strip. A high-end gaming console rests on my glass coffee table, wires trailing across the floor. Julian is sprawled on my velvet sofa. He wears a heavy headset, yelling instructions into a microphone, his thumbs flying across a controller. He does not even look up when I walk past. He just flicks a hand in my direction, a dismissive gesture you might give a passing waiter. I do not say a word. I do not unplug his machine. I bypass the living room and head down the hall toward the one space I explicitly declared off limits, my home office. This room requires a physical key. It houses sensitive corporate documents, client portfolios, and the quiet environment I need to run complex statistical models. I reach for the brass doorknob. The door pushes open before I can turn the key. The lock mechanism is scratched, the metal visibly forced. I step over the threshold and the breath catches in my throat. The space is unrecognizable. My custom mahogany desk, a piece I commissioned to fit the bay window overlooking the garden, is shoved unceremoniously against the far wall. The polished wood is littered with empty energy drink cans and tangled charging cables. Standing in the corners of the room are 3 towering ring lights casting a harsh, sterile glare across the space. Ugly squares of gray acoustic foam are hastily taped over my custom wallpaper, the adhesive already peeling the expensive paint beneath. My professional life, my tax ledgers, risk assessment charts, and confidential client files are carelessly shoved into cheap cardboard liquor boxes stacked haphazardly in the hallway. Blair sits on the floor, untangling a bundle of thick black microphone cables. She looks up, freezing for a fraction of a second before arranging her features into a mask of defensive defiance. Julian needs a dedicated space for his podcast, she says, her voice tight, anticipating a fight. You are at the corporate office all day. You hardly ever use this room during the daylight hours anyway. It makes 0 sense to leave it empty when he is trying to build a brand. Julian strolls into the room, pulling the headset down around his neck. He leans against the doorframe, crossing his arms. The smirk on his face is a deliberate provocation. Thanks for understanding, Kaylee, he says, his tone dripping with condescension. The acoustics in here are prime. We just had to clear out some of the clutter to optimize the sound. He is waiting for the explosion. He wants me to yell. He wants me to demand they move his equipment so Blair can jump in and accuse me of being an unsupportive, toxic sibling. He wants to frame me as the villain in his narrative of victimhood. The actuary inside my head steps forward, cool and detached. I look at the scratched lock on the door. I look at the cheap tape ruining the wall. I look at the confidential files sitting in a liquor box. I reach into my blazer pocket and pull out my phone. I open the camera application. I step back into the hallway and snap a clear, high-resolution photograph of the forced lock. The artificial shutter click echoes in the tense room. I walk over to the wall and photograph the adhesive peeling the paint. I take a wide shot of the displaced mahogany desk and the ring lights. "What are you doing?" Blair asks, her voice pitching up, the defiance faltering into confusion. I am updating my insurance inventory, I say, my voice a smooth, flat line. I document changes to the property condition for liability purposes. Please continue setting up. Julian lets out a short, mocking laugh. He shakes his head, turning back to his gaming console in the living room. He thinks I am a neurotic, harmless accountant cataloging paperclips. He thinks my lack of rage is a surrender. I kneel in the hallway next to the stacked liquor boxes, checking the integrity of my client folders to ensure nothing confidential has been compromised. Beside the bottom box sits a small wicker wastebasket pulled from beneath my desk. Inside, resting on top of a discarded fast food wrapper, is a crumpled white envelope. The transparent window reveals a familiar red logo. It is a collections agency. I slip my hand into the basket and slide the envelope out. I smooth the wrinkled paper against my thigh, keeping my back turned to Blair so she cannot see what I am holding. It is a billing statement for a premium cable and fiber optic internet package. The service address listed at the top is my home in Westport. The name printed on the billing line is Julian Pierce. The balance is 3 months past due, carrying a hefty late fee. Most people would look at this piece of trash and feel annoyance. They would march into the living room and demand to know why a guest is ordering expensive television packages without permission. I do not feel annoyance. I feel the cold, sharp click of a puzzle piece locking into place. This is not just an unpaid bill. This is a paper trail. In the state of Connecticut, establishing legal residency is a game of documentation. By registering a utility service at this address in his own name, Julian is generating a verifiable history of occupancy. He is planting a flag in the soil of my property. If I ever try to change the locks or throw his belongings onto the lawn, he can present this bill to a responding police officer and claim he is a legal tenant. He is methodically building a case for squatters' rights. This is not a lazy boyfriend taking advantage of a grieving sister. This is a calculated, slow-moving theft. I fold the paper neatly in half. I slip it into the inside pocket of my blazer, right next to my heart. I do not confront him. I do not ask Blair why her boyfriend is running up debts under my roof. You do not show a thief that you have found their lockpicks. You smile, you offer them a drink, and you quietly reinforce the vault. This piece of paper is a weapon, and it will detonate on my timeline, not his. I stand up, dusting off my knees. I look at Blair, who is still glaring at me from the floor of my ruined office. I need to get her out of the house for a few hours. I need time to secure my real assets. Take my credit card, I tell her, pulling a sleek piece of plastic from my wallet and tossing it onto the floor beside her. Go into town and buy whatever cables Julian needs to finish his setup. Dinner is on me tonight. She looks at the card, then up at me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. But the allure of free money wins. She snatches the card, a triumphant smile breaking across her face. As soon as I hear Julian's sports car tear down the gravel driveway heading toward the electronics store, I do not clean up the office. I go straight to my secure filing cabinet, retrieve my master financial ledger, and notice something that makes the blood freeze in my veins. The cable bill is just the tip of the iceberg, and Julian has been digging much deeper into my accounts than I ever imagined. The glow of my computer monitor casts a pale, sterile light across my face. The past due cable bill sitting in my blazer pocket was merely a symptom. The real disease is spreading through my digital ledgers. I open my primary banking portal, my eyes scanning the localized transactions for the past 30 days. The numbers tell a story of unchecked gluttony. I trace the line items tied to the credit card linked to the family tablet downstairs. $300 at an artisanal butcher shop in town. $400 for imported caviar and truffles from a specialty grocer. A recurring tab at a high-end liquor delivery service totaling nearly $2,000. Julian did not just memorize my card number. He automated his parasitism. In the actuarial field, we evaluate loss ratios. When a localized loss exceeds the acceptable threshold, you do not just identify the leak, you isolate the asset. A smart thief skims just enough to go unnoticed. A greedy thief gorges until the host collapses. Julian is greedy, and greed creates fatal blind spots. The next morning, Sunday sunlight spills across the Italian marble of the kitchen island. Julian stands at the stove, flipping expensive steaks with my silver tongs. Blair sits on a bar stool, scrolling through her phone. The smell of rich, dark roast coffee fills the air. It looks like a domestic television commercial funded entirely by my labor. I walk into the kitchen, my footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. I pour myself a glass of water, lean against the counter, and look directly at Julian. I need you to unlink my credit card from your delivery applications, I say, my voice steady and low. Julian does not flinch. He slowly lowers the tongs. He lets out a heavy theatrical sigh, tilting his head as if dealing with an unreasonable child. He does not defend himself. He does not apologize. He simply turns his gaze to Blair, passing the baton. Blair reacts exactly as he programmed her to. She drops her phone onto the counter with a loud smack. Her eyes well up with instant practice tears. "You are tracking our groceries?" she asks, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "You sit in this giant estate with millions in the bank, and you are auditing the food we eat?" I take a sip of my water. "I am auditing unauthorized transactions," I reply. Blair slips off the stool, stepping between me and Julian. She raises her voice, weaponizing her own insecurity. "This is financial abuse, Kaylee. You are trying to control us. You want me to beg for scraps in my own home. Mom and Dad would be sick if they saw how selfish you have become." The invocation of our parents is a precision strike designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. A year ago, that sentence would have shattered my resolve. I would have backpedaled, apologized, and written a blank check to buy her affection. Today, the words just confirm that the rot in her character is terminal. "I will handle the household grocery budget from now on," I say, evenly placing my glass in the sink. "Enjoy your breakfast." I turn my back on them and walk up the stairs. Before I even reach the landing, I pull out my phone. I open my banking application and navigate to the security settings. With 3 swift taps, I freeze the primary accounts. I cancel the compromised cards and revoke all authorized user privileges. The financial artery is severed. But cutting off a parasite's food supply triggers a panic response. Cornered animals bite. I need them to feel victorious while I maneuver in the shadows. I need them complacent, arrogant, and distracted. I need a decoy. An hour later, I return to the kitchen. Julian is sitting alone at the island, chewing his premium steak. I bring my laptop and set it on the granite surface. I open a web browser and deliberately type specific queries into the search engine, making sure the text is large and visible. How to gift residential property to a sibling, Connecticut estate transfer tax exemptions, transferring a deed without a realtor. I leave the screen glowing brightly. I murmur something about checking the mail and walk out the back door, leaving the computer unguarded. I do not go to the mailbox. I step onto the stone patio and press my back against the brick chimney hiding in the morning shadows. I watch the kitchen through the reflection in the glass doors. Julian stops chewing. His eyes dart toward the open laptop. He sets his fork down and slides carefully off his stool. He leans over the granite counter, his eyes scanning my search history. A slow, arrogant smile spreads across his face. The reflection captures his triumph. He thinks he has broken me. He believes my lack of yelling and my retreat upstairs were the dying spasms of my resistance. He thinks I am researching how to hand over the keys to buy my peace. He swallows the bait whole. That night, the house is eerily quiet. With the grandfather clock unplugged, the silence is heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. I stand in the dark hallway of the second floor, the hardwood cold beneath my bare feet. The door to the guest bedroom is cracked open a fraction of an inch. Julian is whispering inside. His voice is a low, excited murmur in the dark. "We just need to ride her out," he tells Blair. "She is cracking. I saw her computer. If she signs the deed over, we win. If she hesitates, we stay put. We keep getting mail here. We establish legal residency. In 6 months, she cannot kick us out without a formal court order. She hates public drama. She will fold. We just wear her down until she leaves." I stand perfectly still in the shadows. He is laying out the exact parameters of his scheme: squatters' rights, attrition, psychological warfare. He plans to turn my desire for peace into a weapon against me. He intends to steal my home without ever raising his voice. I retreat to my master suite in silence. I have all the data I require. The variables are locked in place. The threat model is complete. But arrogant men always overplay their hand. Julian feels so secure in his impending victory that he decides to assert dominance over the physical landscape. The next morning, I look out my second-story window and see a stranger in a neon vest walking across my pristine lawn, unrolling a long yellow measuring tape. Julian stands next to him, holding a cup of coffee, pointing toward my mother's prized hydrangea bushes. He is outlining a space for a custom outdoor hot tub. Hector has tended the grounds of this estate for 10 years. He planted those hydrangeas with my mother. He is a quiet, proud man who treats the soil like a sacred trust. He is the last remaining thread connecting this property to the people who built it. Julian does not know this. Julian only sees an obstacle to his luxury spa. I watch from the window as Hector walks right toward them, gripping a pair of heavy iron pruning shears. The tension on the lawn is palpable, and the true cost of my sister's delusion is about to claim its first innocent casualty. The morning sun glints off the heavy iron pruning shears in Hector's weathered hands. From my vantage point at the second-story window, I observe the geometry of the impending collision. Julian stands on the pristine Kentucky bluegrass, wearing expensive loafers with no socks. The contractor in the neon vest marks a perimeter with orange spray paint, drawing a crude square perilously close to a row of heirloom hydrangeas. Hector stops 5 feet away from them. He does not shout. He is a man built of quiet dignity, his face lined by a decade of Connecticut winters and relentless summer sun. He gestures toward the driveway. Julian has parked his low-slung sports car at a jagged angle, the rear tires crushing the edge of a manicured flower bed and blocking access to the cedar equipment shed. I crack the window open just enough to catch the audio. "Excuse me," Hector says, his voice carrying a raspy, steady baritone. "You need to move your vehicle. I cannot access the riding mower, and your tires are damaging the root system of the perennials." Julian pauses his conversation with the contractor. He looks Hector up and down, taking in the faded denim overalls and the dirt-stained boots. Julian lets out a short, dismissive breath. "I will move it when we are done here," Julian replies, waving his hand as if swatting away a gnat. "Work around it." Hector does not move. He grips the shears tighter. "Mrs. Collins planted those flowers 12 years ago," he states, his tone hardening. "You are ruining the soil bed. I am asking you to move the car, now." Julian hates being challenged, especially in front of an audience. The contractor shifts uncomfortably, staring at his clipboard. Julian steps forward, invading Hector's personal space. "Listen to me," Julian snaps, his voice rising sharp and nasal. "I am finalizing the blueprints for my new spa deck. You just cut the grass. Do not tell me where to park on my own property." Hector stands his ground, a silent mountain of a man, refusing to yield to a parasite. Julian glares at him for 3 long seconds before spinning on his heel. He marches back toward the main house, his face flushed red with unearned indignation. The contractor awkwardly pretends to inspect his spray paint. I step away from the window. The variables are shifting rapidly. Julian cannot fire Hector. He has no legal authority, but he holds the leash of the person who does. By the time I walk down the sweeping wooden staircase and step out the side door, the damage is already done. I find Hector standing by his rusted pickup truck near the garage. His shoulders, usually broad and unyielding, are slumped. He is staring at the glowing screen of his smartphone. I walk across the gravel driveway, the stones grinding beneath my shoes. Hector looks up. His dark eyes hold a mixture of profound sadness and quiet resignation. "I am sorry, Miss Cayley," he says, his voice thick. "I did not mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to protect your mother's garden." He turns the phone around so I can read the screen. The text message is from Blair. "Your behavior toward Julian was unacceptable and insubordinate. You are disrespectful to the man of the house. Pack your tools and leave the estate immediately. Your services are no longer required." The words are precise, venomous, and entirely dictated by Julian. Blair lacks the spine to fire a man to her face. She uses a digital screen to execute a loyal employee who once helped her build a treehouse in the backyard. She sacrifices a decade of devotion to appease the bruised ego of a man she met at a bar. Hector carefully places his iron shears into a battered metal toolbox in the bed of his truck. I know the arithmetic of his life. He is a widower. He has a daughter named Sophia who just started her sophomore year at the University of Connecticut. He relies on this steady income to keep her enrolled. Blair knows this too, and she fired him anyway. A lesser strategist would march into the kitchen, rip the phone from Blair's hand, and reinstate Hector on the spot. I feel the urge to do exactly that. The injustice burns a hot, bright flare in my chest. But reacting emotionally plays directly into their trap. If I overrule Blair in front of Julian, it confirms their narrative. They will claim I am a tyrant, overriding family decisions, pushing them further into their victim complex. I need them to believe they possess total control. I must maintain my cover. I reach into my blazer pocket. I carry a sleek, leather-bound checkbook for emergency contractors. I rest it on the hood of Hector's truck, pull a fountain pen from my collar, and uncap it. "Do not apologize to me, Hector," I say, my voice steady, though a dangerous edge creeps into the vowels. "You did exactly what my mother would have wanted." I write a sequence of numbers on the paper. I calculate his monthly salary, multiply it by 12, and add the exact projected cost of Sophia's remaining university tuition. I sign my name with a sharp, definitive flourish. I tear the slip free and hand it to him. Hector looks at the paper, his eyes widen, darting from the ink to my face. "Miss Cayley, this is too much. I cannot accept this." "You will accept it," I reply, pressing the paper into his callous palm. "This is not charity. It is hazard pay for dealing with a pest infestation. Furthermore, you are not unemployed." I pull out my phone and dial the direct extension for the Human Resources Director at Apex Risk Management. She answers on the second ring. I bypass the pleasantries. "Sarah, I have a new hire for the Stamford corporate campus, groundskeeper and exterior maintenance lead. His name is Hector. I want him on premium salary, full medical benefits, effective Monday morning. Email me the onboarding packet." I hang up before she can ask questions. I look back at Hector. The tension drains from his face, replaced by a profound, unspeakable relief. He wipes a single tear from the rough skin of his cheek, nodding slowly. "Thank you," he whispers. "Drive safe, Hector," I tell him. "Keep your phone on. Sarah will call you tomorrow." I watch his pickup truck rumble down the long driveway and turn onto the main road, disappearing beyond the tree line. The estate feels instantly colder. The last remnant of my parents' warmth has just been forcibly evicted. But as I stand on the empty gravel, a distinct sense of liberation washes over me. Hector was the only innocent bystander left in the crossfire. He was the collateral damage I feared most. With him safely removed and financially secure, my hands are no longer tied. The blast radius is clear. I am officially free to deploy the nuclear option. I turn back toward the sprawling colonial house. It no longer looks like a sanctuary. It looks like a compromised asset. Living under that roof means subjecting myself to daily psychological warfare, fighting over inches of hallway and grocery receipts. I need a bunker. I need a vantage point where I can observe their mistakes without suffering their noise. I spend the next 2 hours packing 3 designer suitcases. I retrieve my locked fireproof box containing my passport, my mother's jewelry, and the physical deeds to the property. I carry my luggage out the side door, leaving the main house behind. I unlock the carriage house located 50 yards behind the estate. Originally designed as an in-law suite, it features a small kitchenette, a stone fireplace, and a secure deadbolt. It is secluded, quiet, and impenetrable. I arrange my monitors on the small dining table. I sync my laptop to the hidden audio-visual security network I installed throughout the main residence weeks ago. I pour a cup of black coffee and sit in front of the glowing screens. The live feeds display my living room, my kitchen, and my foyer in crisp, high-definition color. I watch Julian pacing the kitchen, gesturing animatedly while Blair nods in agreement. They are intoxicated by their perceived victory. They think firing a gardener makes them the rulers of the kingdom. I lean back in my chair, sipping the bitter coffee. The trap is set, the bait is taken. Suddenly, the harsh buzz of the intercom system interrupts the silence. I glance at the security feed dedicated to the front wrought iron gates. The camera captures a towering white commercial vehicle idling on the street. It is a moving van. The license plates are from out of state. The heavy diesel engine rumbles, shaking the camera lens. The extended grifters have arrived, hauling their cheap furniture and their staggering entitlement directly to my doorstep. The real war is about to begin. The intercom buzzes. The security monitor inside my carriage house flares to life, displaying a high-definition feed of the wrought iron gates at the edge of the property. A white commercial box truck sits idling on the asphalt. The side panel bears the generic logo of a budget rental company. Normal weekend visitors arrive with canvas duffel bags or leather suitcases. They do not arrive hauling dual-axle freight vehicles. I watch the screen as Julian's silhouette moves across the foyer camera in the main house. He hits the release button. The iron gates swing inward, granting the invaders access to the sprawling grounds. Richard and Helen Pierce step out of the cab. Richard wears a rumpled blazer that strains across his midsection, his voice booming over the diesel engine as he barks directions at the hired driver. Helen is a slender, sharp-featured woman who surveys the manicured lawn with the hungry, calculating gaze of a lottery winner. They raised Julian. They taught him the mechanics of entitlement. Richard spent 30 years as a mid-level manager at a logistics firm, cultivating a deep resentment for anyone above his pay grade. Now he paces my driveway, eyeing the architecture like a pirate calculating plunder. The truck bed opens. The driver begins unloading cardboard boxes, floor lamps, and a hideous faux leather recliner. This is not a weekend visit. This is a colonization. I sit in the safety of the carriage house, sipping black coffee, watching them drag their mediocre lives across my imported Italian marble. I do not intervene. A snare only works if the prey feels comfortable stepping onto the trigger plate. By Sunday evening, I must cross the lawn and enter the main house. Attendance at the family dinner is a tactical requirement. I need to look them in the eye. I need to present the illusion of a cornered, defeated host. The air inside the colonial is heavy, thick with the smell of roasted poultry and the chemical sting of Julian's cologne. I step into the dining room and the breath leaves my lungs in a sudden, sharp exhale. Helen stands by the bay window. She is holding a glass of my reserve wine. Draped over her narrow shoulders is a powder blue cashmere shawl. It is not just any garment. My father bought that shawl in Milan for my mother's 50th birthday. My mother wore it during quiet mornings when she drank tea on the patio. It carries her memory, her elegance, and the faint lingering scent of her lavender perfume. Helen runs her fingers over the delicate fringe, her nails painted a chipping crimson. She catches me staring. She offers a tight, predatory grin. Blair told me your mother left a closet full of beautiful things, Helen says, her tone dripping with false sweetness. It gets so drafty in these big old houses. I hope you do not mind. The urge to cross the room and rip the fabric from her shoulders is a physical pressure in my chest. It burns. It demands action. But my actuary training overrides the primal instinct. Anger is an unpredictable variable. It clouds judgment. I force my hands to relax, smoothing the fabric of my trousers. It suits you, I say, my voice a hollow, flat line. Helen preens, turning back to the window. The psychological warfare is escalating. They are wearing my mother's clothes, firing my staff, and treating my home like a conquered province. We sit at the custom mahogany table. I had plugged the grandfather clock back into the wall earlier that afternoon, desperate to restore its mechanical heartbeat to the foyer. It ticks now, a rhythmic, stoic reminder of my father counting down the seconds to the ambush. The roast chicken sits half-eaten on bone china plates. Blair sets her fork down. The silver clinks against the porcelain, signaling the main event. She clears her throat, her posture rigid. Kaylee Blair begins. Her tone takes on that rehearsed fragile edge. Julian and I have been talking. The commute from his apartment is draining him, and his parents just finalized the sale of their condo. I take a sip of my water, keeping my gaze level, observing the calculated performance. I see. So Blair continues lifting her chin. The fragility vanishes, replaced by a cold, unyielding stare. Starting tomorrow, Julian, Richard, and Helen are moving in here permanently. They will take the master suite and the guest wing. The room holds its breath. Julian leans back, a smug expression settling on his features. Helen reaches over and pats Blair's hand. Richard takes a long sip of wine, pretending to be a passive observer. This house is big enough for family, Blair says. You rattling around in this giant place alone is depressing. We are bringing life back into it. If you have a problem with that setup, you can move out. There is the ultimatum. The demand that I abandon my 12-year investment to accommodate a family of grifters. The audacity is breathtaking. They rely entirely on my aversion to public conflict. They expect me to argue, to cry, or to storm out in a huff, ceding the territory by default. I pick up my linen napkin. I dab the corner of my mouth. I look at Blair, then at Julian, and finally at Richard and Helen. I let a slow, quiet smile pull at my lips. It is the smile of a predator watching a snare pull tight. "Enjoy your dessert," I whisper. I push my chair back, the wood scraping softly against the rug. I turn my back on the table and walk out the front door. The cool night air hits my face, clearing the suffocating scent of cheap cologne and roasted meat. The gravel crunches beneath my shoes as I cross the dark lawn toward the carriage house. Inside my secure bunker, the silence is pristine. I sit at the small dining table, booting up my encrypted laptop. The screen illuminates my face. I work for Apex Risk Management, a global firm that analyzes catastrophic data for multinational corporations. I navigate complex legal frameworks, identifying loopholes, and constructing airtight financial shelters. What Blair and Julian do not know is that my firm owns a highly lucrative subsidiary. It is called Apex Recovery Centers. Apex Recovery Centers specializes in purchasing secluded, luxury coastal properties. They convert these sprawling estates into ultra-exclusive private rehabilitation facilities for high-net-worth clients. Politicians, executives, and celebrities pay astronomical sums to recover in absolute privacy. Apex is always hunting for discreet waterfront real estate in Fairfield County. They bypass standard residential mortgages, preferring lightning-fast, all-cash corporate acquisitions to secure prime locations before competitors even see a listing. I am a senior executive within the parent company. I possess direct access to the acquisition board. I do not need a real estate agent. I do not need a public listing. I possess the capability to liquidate a multi-million-dollar asset with a single phone call. The subsidiary operates with ruthless efficiency. They do not care about family disputes, squatter rights, or forged leases. They represent a faceless, unstoppable corporate machine backed by billions in capital. I type my master password into the security portal. The hidden audio-visual feeds from the main house spring to life across my monitors. I adjust the volume dial. In the dining room, Julian is standing at the head of my table. He pops the cork on a bottle of expensive champagne, the foam spilling over the dark wood. Richard laughs, a booming, arrogant sound. Helen raises her glass, the blue cashmere shawl slipping elegantly off one shoulder. She cracked. Julian gloats, his voice distorted slightly by the hidden microphone. She did not even put up a fight. Tomorrow, we change the locks on the master suite. I watch them celebrate their stolen kingdom. I record the footage, archiving the audio files to an encrypted cloud server. The game has evolved. They are no longer testing boundaries. They are claiming sovereignty. But their arrogance is a terminal vulnerability. I lean closer to the monitor, listening to their drunken plotting. Tomorrow, their plan will escalate from simple trespass into something far more dangerous, crossing a line that will grant me the power to destroy their lives permanently. The digital numbers on my carriage house clock click past midnight. The glow from the encrypted security monitors paints the walls in a pale, sterile blue. Inside the main residence, the victory celebration is shifting into a darker, quieter phase. The expensive champagne is gone. Helen yawns, pulling my mother's cashmere shawl tight around her shoulders, and excuses herself to the master suite. Only Julian, Blair, and Richard remain in the dining room. I lean closer to the center screen. The audio feed is pristine, capturing the faint crackle of Richard lighting a cheap cigar right there at the dining table. The smoke drifts up toward the custom crown molding, leaving a stain of disrespect in the air. Julian waves away the smoke and leans forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany. The smug, drunken arrogance has melted from his face, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. He motions for Blair to sit closer. He reaches down near his feet and lifts a small black canvas gym bag onto the table. The heavy zipper makes a rasping sound in the quiet room. "We need to talk about the timeline," Julian says, his voice a low, measured hum. "Waiting 6 months to establish squatters' rights leaves too many variables on the board. She is calculating. She moved out there to watch us. If she hires a decent eviction attorney, they could tie us up in housing court. We need control of the asset now." Richard puffs on his cigar. The glowing cherry reflects in the dark window panes. "How do you propose we do that, son?" "The deed is in her name." Julian reaches into the canvas bag. He pulls out 3 small, amber-tinted pharmacy bottles and sets them on the table. The plastic clicks sharply against the wood. The labels have been meticulously peeled away, leaving only a sticky white residue. In the state of Connecticut, Julian begins sounding like a man who has researched his crimes thoroughly. An emergency psychiatric evaluation can be ordered if a person is deemed an imminent danger to themselves. It requires a call to emergency services and evidence of a severe mental break. Blair stares at the empty bottles. Her eyes widen, a flicker of genuine hesitation crossing her features. "Julian, what are those?" "Insurance," he replies smoothly. He slides one of the amber bottles toward her. He explains the mechanism of his trap with terrifying precision. He outlines a legal loophole designed to strip away civil liberties. If medical professionals determine that a homeowner is mentally incapacitated, the probate court steps in. As the only living blood relative, Blair can petition for emergency conservatorship. She would gain immediate lawful authority over my medical decisions, my finances, and the physical estate. "But Kaylee is not crazy," Blair whispers, her voice trembling. "She is just stubborn." Julian reaches across the table, covering her hand with his. His thumb traces her knuckles, a calculated gesture of comfort hiding a lethal intent. "She is acting erratic, Blair. Think about it. She lost both her parents. She is hoarding her wealth. She just abandoned her own primary residence to live in a detached shed. That is textbook isolation. She is spiraling. We are just helping her get the professional care she desperately needs." Blair looks down at the table. I watch the moral conflict play out across her face. It lasts less than 10 seconds. The allure of the multi-million-dollar property and the validation from the man holding her hand overrides whatever lingering loyalty she holds for her sister. She nods slowly, adopting the false narrative. She really has been acting strange lately. Richard leans forward, resting his heavy forearms on the table. "How do you guarantee the paramedics believe the story? A woman sitting quietly in a shed does not look like a psychiatric emergency." Julian reaches back into the black canvas bag. He produces a small, clear plastic baggie containing a dozen crushed white pills. "I know a guy who works at a clinic downtown," Julian says, his tone dripping with unearned confidence. "These are heavy sedatives, fast-acting. Tomorrow evening, we invite her inside for a truce. A peace offering. We pour her a glass of that reserve Pinot Noir she loves so much. We mix the powder in. It is tasteless." He taps the plastic baggie against the wood. Within 30 minutes, she will lose her equilibrium. She will become confused and slur her words and lose her physical coordination. While she's disoriented, we scatter these empty pharmacy bottles in her carriage house trash bins. We call the police. We tell them she is inconsolable over your parents, that she's been self-medicating, and that she just took a handful of unknown pills. Richard smiles a slow, ugly stretching of his lips. The paramedics arrive, find a sedated, incoherent woman surrounded by empty pill bottles, and they haul her off for a mandatory 72-hour hold. "Exactly," Julian confirms. Once she is locked in a ward, Blair files the emergency conservatorship paperwork. By the time Kaylee sobers up and tries to argue her way out of the hospital, we have legal control of the estate. The house becomes ours. I sit in the carriage house, the ambient chill of the room seeping into my bones. In the actuarial field, we utilize a concept known as a black swan event. It describes an occurrence that deviates beyond what is normally expected of a situation, carrying severe, catastrophic consequences. I had modeled their behavior based on greed and entitlement. I expected them to steal my groceries, forge utility bills, and ruin my credit score. I did not expect them to orchestrate a chemical assault. The betrayal is total. It transcends a mere real estate dispute. This is a premeditated threat to my physical safety and my fundamental liberty. They are plotting to drug me, strip away my autonomy, and lock me inside a psychiatric facility, all to steal the roof over their heads. My pulse does not race. The adrenaline does not make my hands shake. Instead, my brain shifts into an entirely different gear. The analytical detachment deepens, freezing over my emotions until nothing remains but cold mathematical certainty. Julian just handed me the ultimate leverage. He escalated the conflict from civil trespass into a criminal conspiracy to commit fraud, assault, and false imprisonment. I reach for my keyboard. The keys clatter softly in the quiet room. I isolate the video and audio files from the dining room camera, selecting the exact timestamp where Julian places the pills on the table and articulates his plan. I initiate a secure transfer protocol. Data is only useful if it is indestructible. I route the encrypted video files to 3 separate locations. The first copy goes to a physical external hard drive locked in my fireproof safe. The second copy uploads to a secure cloud server managed by my corporate IT department. The third copy is forwarded to a dormant email address I maintain for emergency digital archiving. A green progress bar fills the center of my screen. I watch it glide from left to right, representing the digital preservation of Julian's impending ruin. Transfer complete. I close the security portal and lean back in my chair. The soft hum of the carriage house refrigerator fills the silence. If they intend to file emergency legal petitions tomorrow, the timeline has officially collapsed. Waiting for them to execute their plan and relying on the police to untangle the truth is an unacceptable risk. The moment chemical sedatives enter the equation, the variable becomes fatal. I must preempt the strike. To dismantle a conspiracy of this magnitude, I need a legal architect. I need someone who operates without sentiment, someone who understands how to wield corporate law like a scalpel. I pull my phone from my blazer pocket. I scroll past the contacts for my colleagues and my financial advisors, stopping on a single name: Silas. Silas is the senior managing partner of a ruthless commercial real estate firm in downtown Stamford. He does not handle petty residential disputes. He handles corporate liquidations, hostile takeovers, and billion-dollar trust transfers. He is a man who speaks in billable hours and contractual clauses. I glance at the digital clock on my desk. It is 2 a.m. I press the green call button and lift the phone to my ear. The line rings twice before a sharp awake voice answers on the other end. Accustomed to late-night crisis management, Colin Silas says, his tone crisp and professional. "What is burning?" I look at the glowing monitors, watching Julian pack his empty pill bottles back into his canvas bag, secure in his delusional victory. I need to trigger the blind trust I tell Silas, my voice a calm, steady whisper in the dark. I need to liquidate the Westport estate, and I need the title transferred to the corporate subsidiary before the sun sets on Tuesday. There is a brief pause on the line. I hear the rustle of paper, the sound of a man shifting into a predatory stance. "That is an aggressive timeline, Kaylee," Silas replies. "What changed your risk assessments?" "The tenants have become a liability," I say. "They are planning a hostile takeover. I intend to sell the ground beneath their feet. I will have the board assembled by dawn," Silas promises. "Bring your documentation to the office at 8. I end the call. The screen goes black. I turn my gaze back to the main house, where the lights are finally switching off one by one. "Sleep well, Julian," I whisper to the empty room. "Tomorrow the flood arrives." The drive down Interstate 95 toward downtown Stamford offers a stark contrast to the quiet tension poisoning my home. The morning sun reflects off the Long Island Sound, painting the horizon in streaks of pale gold and bruised purple. Inside the cabin of my sedan, the climate control hums a steady neutral tone. I keep both hands resting lightly on the leather steering wheel. The adrenaline from last night's discovery has settled into a cold, crystalline focus. Julian believes he is playing a game of emotional attrition. He thinks stealing my property requires nothing more than stubbornness, a few empty pill bottles, and a dramatic phone call to emergency services. He operates on the level of a street hustler. I operate on the level of a senior corporate actuary. I pull into the subterranean parking garage of a towering glass high-rise. The elevator ascends 30 floors in smooth, ear-popping silence. The doors slide open to reveal the reception area of Vanguard Legal Partners. The firm does not handle divorces, petty civil disputes, or standard residential real estate. They specialize in high-stakes corporate litigation, mergers, and institutional acquisitions. Silas waits for me in his corner office. He is a man carved from polished granite and expensive worsted wool. He stands looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a ceramic cup of black coffee. He does not offer empty pleasantries. He values efficiency above all other human traits. "Take a seat, Collins," Silas says, turning toward his expansive glass desk. He taps a thick file folder resting in the center. I reviewed the footage you transferred to our secure server at 2 in the morning. Your sister's boyfriend is highly motivated, dangerously arrogant, and legally ignorant. I sit in the structured leather chair opposite him, crossing my ankles. I outline the variables. They intend to spike my wine, stage a psychiatric emergency, and file for temporary conservatorship. They want to bypass eviction laws by claiming medical authority over the estate. Silas nods, his expression analytical. It is a desperate maneuver, but in Connecticut, probate courts act swiftly when presented with an imminent medical crisis. If paramedics transport you under a 72-hour hold, your sister can file the paperwork before you are even allowed to speak with an attorney. Then we remove the prize from the board, I reply smoothly. I want them off the premises by tomorrow morning. Silas leans back, lacing his fingers together. He delivers the harsh reality of residential law. If we rely on standard eviction protocols, Kaylee, we are looking at a miserable timeline. Julian has established a paper trail. He receives mail at your address. He possesses utility bills bearing his name. The local housing court will classify him as a month-to-month tenant, regardless of whether he pays rent. He pauses, letting the heavy legal truth settle in the quiet office. To remove him, we must serve a formal notice to quit. He will ignore it. Then we file a summons and complaint. He will request a stay of execution. He will drag this through the courts for 8 grueling months. It will be a public spectacle. He will drag your name, your sister, and your parents' memory through the local tabloids. I look at Silas, feeling the corners of my mouth lift into a faint, grim smile. You are assuming I own that house as a private citizen. Silas narrows his eyes, his interest suddenly piqued. 14 months ago, shortly after the probate closed on my parents' estate, I recognized the inherent vulnerabilities of holding a multi-million-dollar physical asset in my own name. I explain, keeping my voice measured and precise. I hired a boutique firm in Delaware to establish a blind corporate trust. The Westport property was transferred into that holding company. I lean forward, resting my forearms on the cool glass desk. I am not the legal owner of the Coastal Colonial. The Collins Family Trust is the legal owner. I simply possess the controlling shares of that entity. A slow, genuine grin spreads across Silas's face. The legal landscape of the room shifts instantly. We are no longer discussing a messy residential eviction. We are discussing a corporate buyout. Apex Risk Management has a subsidiary. I continue watching Silas track this strategic maneuver. Apex Recovery Centers. They procure secluded waterfront properties to build discreet, high-net-worth rehabilitation facilities. They bypass traditional mortgage contingencies by utilizing unrestricted institutional capital. They are currently seeking a new location in Fairfield County. Silas opens the thick file folder, pulling out a pristine stack of legal documents. You do not want to sell the real estate, he says, finishing my thought. You want to sell the controlling shares of the trust directly to the subsidiary. Exactly, I confirm. A standard real estate transaction requires title searches, public recordings, and escrow periods lasting 30 to 60 days. Transferring corporate equity happens the moment the board signs the contract and the wire transfer clears. Silas slides a heavy silver fountain pen across the desk. I have the acquisition board from Apex Recovery Center standing by on a secure conference line. They have already authorized the all-cash purchase of the holding company. I pick up the pen. The metal feels cool and substantial in my grip. I flip to the signature page of the equity transfer agreement. With 3 fluid strokes, I sign away the emotional anchor of my past, transforming my childhood sanctuary into cold, hard capital. The moment the ink dries, the Westport property ceases to be a residential home. It officially becomes a commercial healthcare asset governed by corporate trespass laws. Residential tenant protections vanish into thin air. While I sit in a Stanford high-rise finalizing a billion-dollar corporate maneuver, Julian is busy orchestrating his own legal defense back in Westport. Before I left the carriage house this morning, I checked the hidden patio camera. Julian was pacing the stone terrace, speaking frantically into his cell phone. He called a man named Marcus, an old fraternity brother, who currently holds a license as a notary public. Julian realizes that his squatter strategy might face a hurdle if the police ask for a formal lease during his planned psychiatric ambush tonight. Julian is a man who relies on counterfeit authority. He believes a piece of paper can manipulate reality if it carries a stamp. Right now, Julian is sitting in a crowded coffee shop 2 towns over, sliding a crisp $100 bill across a sticky table. Marcus hands him a standard boilerplate residential lease agreement downloaded from the internet. Julian fills in his own name as the primary tenant. He grants himself a 2-year term with a fixed monthly rent of $0, citing a fabricated familial caretaking arrangement. Then Julian carefully traces the letters of my name onto the landlord's signature line, mimicking the loops and angles he observed on discarded mail. Marcus pulls a heavy brass embosser from his briefcase. He stamps the fraudulent document, deliberately backdating the seal by 2 full months to create the illusion of an established long-term contract. Julian slides the forged lease into his leather jacket. He walks out of the coffee shop feeling invincible. He thinks he holds the ultimate trump card. He believes that when the authorities arrive tonight, he can simply wave that notarized paper in their faces and they will bow to his legal standing. He does not comprehend the magnitude of his error. He is forging a residential lease for a property that is no longer zoned for residential use. He is attempting to defraud a homeowner who no longer owns the home. Back in the pristine office, Silas checks his encrypted tablet. A sharp, high-pitched chime echoes through the room. "The escrow account just updated," Silas announces, his voice ringing with finality. "The corporate wire transfer has cleared. The transaction is complete. Apex Recovery Centers is now the sole legal proprietor of the Westport estate." I stand up, smoothing the front of my blazer. I leave the silver pen on the glass desk. The trap is armed. The vault is sealed. Julian is walking into a labyrinth of his own making, clutching a fake map. I walk toward the elevator, preparing to return to the carriage house. It is time to let the arrogant parasite spring the final trigger. The drive back from the glass high-rise in Stamford is swift, the midday traffic parting along the interstate. I return to the Westport property, easing my sedan onto the gravel shoulder far away from the main driveway. I do not want the crunch of my tires alerting the occupants of the primary residence to my arrival. I slip through the side gate, moving like a ghost across the manicured lawn, and unlock the heavy door of the carriage house. Inside, the air is stale and cool. I drop my keys onto the counter. The corporate transaction is finalized. The trap is built, armed and waiting in the shadows. But a trap is useless if the prey senses the steel jaws. To guarantee Julian and Blair walk blindly into their own ruin, they must feel an overwhelming sense of control. They must believe their psychological warfare is working. A successful predator must occasionally mimic the behavior of the wounded. I stand in front of the small bathroom mirror. I study my reflection. My posture is too straight, my gaze too sharp, my tailored blazer too immaculate. This is the armor of an actuary. I need to look like a woman crumbling under the weight of unresolved grief and sudden isolation. I pull the pins from my hair, letting the dark strands fall in a tangled, uneven mess around my face. I unbutton the top collar of my crisp silk blouse, pulling the fabric askew. I splash cold water on my cheeks and rub my eyes until the skin beneath them flushes a harsh, mottled red, mimicking the physical toll of a sleepless, crying jag. Stepping out of the bathroom, I move through the small living space, systematically dismantling the order. I scatter loose papers across the floor. I knock a stack of old magazines off the coffee table. Finally, I grab the heavy velvet curtains and yank them shut, plunging the carriage house into a stifling artificial gloom. The stage is set. I sit on the edge of the sofa in the dark, waiting. It does not take long. 30 minutes later, the gravel outside crunches beneath light, hesitant footsteps. Julian is a coward who prefers to orchestrate chaos from a safe distance, so he has sent his proxy. A sharp knock rattles the wooden door. Kaylee Blair calls out, her voice laced with a thick, artificial concern. "Are you in there? Julian said you have not left the shed all day." I wait 10 seconds, letting the silence stretch, forcing her to knock again. The second knock is louder, more insistent. I shuffle toward the entrance, dragging my feet to create the auditory illusion of lethargy. I disengage the deadbolt with a loud metallic clack and pull the door open just a few inches. I keep my face hidden in the shadows of the unlit room. "What do you want, Blair?" I ask. I modulate my voice, stripping away the confident resonance and replacing it with a hollow, breathy tremor. Blair pushes against the wood, trying to widen the gap. The afternoon sunlight cuts across my face, highlighting my disheveled hair and the red rims of my eyes. Her gaze drops to the floor, taking in the scattered papers and the suffocating darkness of the drawn curtains. "You look terrible," she says. The concern in her tone sounds practiced, a hollow script handed to her by a manipulator. "We are worried about you. You cannot just lock yourself in the dark. It is not healthy." I wrap my arms around my waist, adopting a defensive, shrinking posture. "I just want to be left alone," I whisper, letting a calculated edge of paranoia bleed into the words. "Stop monitoring me. Tell Julian to stop watching the carriage house." Blair's eyes widen. She absorbs the paranoia, the messy hair, the dark room. She is seeing exactly what Julian told her she would see, a woman whose mind is fracturing under the pressure of isolation. "We just want to help you, Kaylee," she says, her voice gaining a sickening edge of patronizing pity. "You need to come inside. You need to talk to someone." I shake my head rapidly, stepping back into the gloom. "Leave me alone," I snap, injecting a spike of irrational panic into the command. I slam the door shut, throwing the deadbolt with a forceful strike. I stand motionless in the dark hallway, listening. I hear Blair's footsteps retreating quickly across the gravel, heading back toward the sprawling Colonial. The moment the sound fades, I drop the fearful posture. My spine straightens. The actuary returns. I walk over to the dining table and tap the spacebar on my encrypted laptop. The security feeds from the main house illuminate the dark room. Blair bursts through the back patio doors, practically vibrating with excitement. Julian sits at the kitchen island sipping a protein shake. Richard and Helen are lounging on the velvet sofa in the adjacent living room, watching daytime television. "She is losing it," Blair announces, breathless. The hidden microphones capture every word with pristine clarity. "I just saw her. She looks like a wreck. Her hair is a mess. She has the curtains taped shut, and she was accusing you of spying on her. She is totally paranoid." Julian sets his shaker cup down. A predatory grin stretches across his face. He looks at his parents, tapping his temple with one finger. "I told you. The isolation is breaking her down. By tonight, she will be incoherent. We serve the wine, we plant the bottles, and the paramedics will take one look at that dark shed and strap her to a stretcher." Blair paces the kitchen floor, her phone clutched tight in her hand. "I need to document this," she murmurs, her thumbs hovering over the digital keyboard. "I need to establish a record so the family knows why we had to take drastic measures." Julian nods in approval. "Do it. Control the narrative before she even knows there is a story." I watch the screen as Blair types furiously. For years, the extended branches of the Collins family tree have viewed our dynamic through a skewed lens. I was always the cold, calculating professional who skipped holiday gatherings to close corporate acquisitions. Blair was the sensitive, artistic younger sister who needed emotional support. Relatives often mistake financial discipline for a lack of empathy, and they mistake public weeping for genuine heart. Blair knows exactly which emotional buttons to press to turn the family against me. 3 minutes later, a sharp vibration rattles the desk in front of me. My smartphone screen lights up with a social media notification, then another, then 5 more in rapid succession. I pick up the device and open the application. Blair has published a sprawling public manifesto on her profile, tagging a dozen aunts, alls, and cousins. The text is a masterpiece of weaponized victimhood. She describes her agonizing grief over the loss of our parents. She details how she moved into the Westport home to keep the family legacy alive. Then the narrative pivots. She paints me as a corporate monster, a woman hoarding her wealth, descending into erratic, paranoid behavior. She claims I abandoned the primary residence to live in a shed, refusing to speak to anyone. The final paragraph is the kill shot. "Pray for my sister. Her mind is unwell. She is trying to throw me and my new family onto the streets because her grief has turned into a bitter, toxic delusion. We are trying to get her professional psychiatric help, but she refuses. Please send strength." The digital response is instantaneous. My phone begins to vibrate with a relentless, angry rhythm. Text messages flood my inbox. Aunt Susan from Ohio writes, "How can you be so cruel to your own flesh and blood? Your mother would be ashamed." Cousin Greg from Boston sends a harsher note. "Stop acting like a spoiled brat and let Blair live in peace. You have enough money. Get therapy." The noise of their uneducated outrage fills the quiet carriage house. They read a fabricated paragraph on the internet and immediately convict me without a trial. They choose the loud weeping narrative over the silent, steady truth. I do not reply to a single message. I do not type a defense. Arguing with a mob only validates their premise. Instead, I swipe my finger across the control panel of my phone and activate the Do Not Disturb function. The device goes dark, the suffocating noise of the extended family ceases instantly. The silence in my bunker is absolute. I turn my attention back to the laptop. I open a fresh encrypted folder on my desktop and label it Defamation. With methodical precision, I begin capturing screenshots. I capture Blair's original post, ensuring the timestamp and her profile handle are clearly visible. I capture the venomous comments from the relatives. I capture the direct text messages calling me a monster. Silas requires documented evidence to execute a civil libel suit. When the dust settles and the corporate buyers claim the estate, Blair will realize that every word she published today carries a staggering financial penalty. She is handing me the rope for her own legal hanging. Once the digital archiving is complete, I close the laptop. I walk into the small bedroom and pull my sleek, hard-shelled designer luggage from the closet. Julian and Blair believe I am hiding in the dark, paralyzed by their psychological pressure. They think the weekend will stretch out before them, culminating in a triumphant ride in an ambulance. They do not know that the clock has already expired. I open the suitcase on the bed. I fold my tailored blazers, my crisp silk blouses, and my wool trousers with mathematical precision. I pack my life away piece by piece, leaving nothing behind but the empty shell of a trap. I zip the luggage shut, the metal teeth locking together with a satisfying final snap. I look out the narrow window toward the main house. The sun is beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long, menacing shadows across the lawn. Tomorrow morning, the Westport police will respond to a frantic emergency call. The confrontation is inevitable. But when the dust settles, the only people being escorted off the premises will be the grifters who believed they could outsmart an actuary. Saturday morning breaks over the Connecticut coastline. The sky is a brilliant, unforgiving shade of blue. The early sunlight filters through the oak trees, casting long, sharp shadows across the manicured grounds of the estate. I stand in the center of the carriage house, holding a ceramic mug of black coffee. The heat radiates through the ceramic, warming my palms. The interior of my temporary bunker is pristine. My tailored blazers and silk blouses are neatly folded inside the designer luggage sitting by the heavy oak door. I pull my smartphone from my pocket and open the secure banking application. A string of numbers glows on the high-definition screen. The escrow account, managed by Vanguard Legal Partners, displays a zero balance. The funds have moved. The multi-million-dollar wire transfer from Apex Recovery Centers rests securely in my private corporate portfolio. The legal metamorphosis is finished. The sprawling coastal colonial sitting 50 yards away is no longer a residential family home. It is a commercial asset, owned by a billion-dollar healthcare conglomerate. I step out onto the small wooden balcony of the carriage house. The salt breeze rustles the leaves of the oak trees, carrying the faint scent of the Long Island Sound. From this elevated vantage point, I possess a clear, unobstructed view of the entire backyard and the rear facade of the main residence. What unfolds below is a masterpiece of dramatic irony. Julian steps out onto the stone patio. He wears expensive aviator sunglasses and holds a bright orange can of marking paint. Richard trails close behind him carrying a heavy yellow measuring tape. Richard spent the late 90s launching a series of independent contracting businesses that all filed for bankruptcy. He spent his adult life blaming local regulations, the economy, and wealthy clients for his own chronic incompetence. He raised his son to believe that success was something you took from others rather than something you earned through discipline. Now Richard views my former estate as the ultimate unearned prize. Julian hands the end of the measuring tape to his father. They stretch the metal ribbon across the pristine Kentucky bluegrass. Julian shakes the spray can. The steel mixing ball rattles loudly in the quiet morning air. He points the nozzle at the ground and sprays a thick, toxic orange line across the lawn. He is outlining the footprint for a custom cedar deck and a sunken hot tub. He paces the perimeter with the inflated posture of a landed aristocrat. He points to a row of mature oak trees, gesturing to his father that they will need to hire a crew to cut them down to improve the water view. I take a slow sip of my coffee. The bitter liquid coats my tongue. In any normal context, watching a stranger spray toxic paint across your lawn and plot the destruction of your trees would trigger a surge of adrenaline. but I feel nothing except a cold, clinical amusement. Julian is not vandalizing my property. He is vandalizing corporate real estate. He is enthusiastically planning luxury renovations on a parcel of land where he currently stands as an undocumented criminal trespasser. Every orange line he paints is a documented unit of property damage that Apex Recovery Centers will eventually add to his civil penalties. My gaze shifts to the second story of the Colonial. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite offer a clear view into the room. Helen and Blair are standing in the center of the space. Helen holds a fan of cardboard paint swatches. She presses a square of pale beige against the custom silk wallpaper my mother imported from France. Blair nods eagerly, pointing to different sections of the room. They are debating color palettes. They are planning to strip away the elegant silk wallpaper and replace it with something sterile and cheap. Helen runs her hand along the mahogany bed frame, claiming ownership of a room she did not finance inside a house she does not own. She is still wearing my mother's blue cashmere shawl, wrapping it tight around her shoulders as she dictates her design choices to my sister. Blair smiles, betraying her own mother's memory for the fleeting approval of a manipulative family. Julian finishes marking the grass. He tosses the empty paint can onto a patio chair. He looks up toward the carriage house. He cannot see me standing in the shadows of the balcony awning, but he knows I am inside. He crosses his arms, flashing a smug, triumphant grin at the drawn curtains. He pats the breast pocket of his jacket. I know exactly what sits inside that pocket. It is the forged residential lease he secured from his corrupt notary contact yesterday. He believes that piece of paper is a magical shield. He thinks it grants him immunity from eviction and solidifies his squatter strategy. He does not understand that a residential lease holds zero legal weight on a commercially zoned corporate facility. He might as well have forged a lease to live inside a bank vault or a grocery store. The paper is worthless, but the act of forging it is a federal crime. He is carrying his own indictment in his breast pocket, smiling as he walks around the yard. Julian walks back into the house, clapping his father on the shoulder. They are celebrating the weekend. They believe they have successfully isolated me, broken my spirit, and secured their future. They think I am cowering in the dark, terrified of my own shadow. I know their timeline. I heard Julian plotting in the dining room last night. They plan to invite me inside for a truce this evening. They intend to pour me a glass of my own reserve wine, spike it with heavy chemical sedatives, and scatter empty prescription bottles in my trash. They are waiting for the perfect moment to call the paramedics and initiate their fraudulent psychiatric hold. Their plan relies entirely on my compliance. It relies on me opening the carriage house door and accepting their false olive branch. I have no intention of opening that door. I will remain locked inside the secure bunker for the remainder of the weekend. I will ignore their knocks. I will ignore their text messages. My silence will frustrate them. It will delay their chemical ambush, forcing them to sit in the main house and stew in their own impatience. They will assume my refusal to emerge is further proof of my mental collapse, reinforcing their delusional narrative. They are unaware that my trap is already sprung. Silas finalized the commercial vacate order early this morning. The corporate acquisition team is finalizing their logistics. The local sheriff has been briefed on the transition of the deed. The gears of a billion-dollar legal machine are grinding into motion, and Julian is standing directly on the tracks, admiring his reflection in the steel. The only remaining variable is the final wave of their physical belongings. The small budget truck they arrived with on Friday only contained a fraction of their hoarded lives. Richard boasted during dinner that the rest of their furniture, their appliances, and their endless boxes of cheap sentimentality were scheduled to arrive via a professional moving fleet on Monday morning. They plan to fill the expansive rooms of the estate with the detritus of their failed condo. I step back inside the carriage house and close the balcony door. The heavy glass silences the sound of the coastal wind. I look at my designer luggage, packed and waiting near the entrance. My encrypted laptop sits on the dining table, quietly archiving the security footage of Julian vandalizing the corporate lawn. I do not need to act erratic anymore. I do not need to hide. I simply need to wait for the sun to rise on Monday. When those heavy freight vehicles pull into the long gravel driveway, the illusion of their victory will shatter against the concrete reality of corporate law. The weekend stretches out before me, a quiet, breathless countdown to their ruin. Monday dawns crisp and bright. The coastal fog burns off, revealing a sky the color of pale slate. At precisely 8 o'clock, the silence of the estate shatters. A low, rhythmic rumble vibrates through the floorboards of the carriage house. I stand by the window, watching the wrought iron gates swing inward. 3 towering freight vehicles grind up the gravel driveway. Their air brakes hiss loudly, disrupting the serene Connecticut morning. The sides of the trailers bear the logo of a cheap interstate transit company. Richard and Helen are importing a lifetime of accumulated clutter. Richard steps out of the lead truck, wearing a stained polo shirt. He points a thick finger at the hired driver, barking orders about where to park the heavy rig to avoid scratching the lawn. Helen stands on the stone patio, holding a clipboard, ready to direct the placement of her hideous faux leather recliners and particle board dining sets. They are cementing their occupation. They view the physical presence of their belongings as the final, unbreakable seal on their stolen territory. Julian, however, is restless. Over the weekend, my strict isolation starved him of oxygen. He could not execute his chemical ambush because I refused to open my door. He paced the patio for 2 days, growing increasingly agitated. He lacks the discipline for a prolonged siege. He demands immediate gratification, and my silence denied him the confrontation he craved. Seeing the freight vehicles arrive triggers a sudden, reckless pivot in his strategy. On the security monitor, I watch Julian pull his smartphone from his pocket. He dials 3 digits. He adopts a posture of distressed urgency, pacing the stone terrace, running a hand through his hair. He is fabricating a crisis. He reports an estranged, unstable relative hiding in the outbuilding, threatening his family while they try to move into their leased home. He is weaponizing the local authorities, attempting to force the psychiatric hold through sheer theatrical panic. He is launching the strike without the sedatives, relying purely on his forged lease and Blair's digital smear campaign to provide the necessary context. 10 minutes later, the wail of sirens slices through the air. The sound bounces off the roof and echoes down toward the Long Island Sound. 2 Westport police cruisers tear up the driveway, their tires kicking up clouds of gray dust, coming to a halt near the idling freight trucks. Red and blue lights strobe in a dizzying rhythm across the pristine white pillars of the front porch. We have caught up to the opening hook. The timeline is now aligned. Julian practically sprints down the porch steps to intercept the officers. His face is flushed an ugly shade of red. He is sweating right through his knockoff designer jacket. I crack the upper pane of my window just enough to capture the raw audio of his performance. "She is insane!" Julian shouts, his voice cracking loud enough to carry across the lawn. He waves the crumpled piece of paper at the uniformed officers. "I have a signed lease right here. She is trespassing. Arrest her!" The older officer, a man with silver hair at his temples, holds up a hand, instructing Julian to lower his voice. Julian ignores the de-escalation tactic. He shoves the paper toward them. He weaves a tale of a grieving, delusional sister who refuses to accept reality, claiming, "I lost my mind after my parents passed away." He points a trembling finger toward the carriage house, painting me as a lurking danger. He says I have been barricaded inside the shed, hoarding weapons and screaming at them through the walls. Blair hovers on the porch, wrapping her arms around herself, playing the frightened victim. She nods along with every lie her boyfriend spins. They have constructed a perfect sympathetic narrative. The younger officer takes the document. It is the forged lease, complete with the backdated notary stamp. To a patrol officer responding to a domestic disturbance, a notarized legal contract represents an administrative shield. Police avoid overriding written leases, typically deferring such conflicts to civil court to avoid unlawful evictions. The younger officer runs his thumb over the raised seal, his expression turning serious. Julian is banking on this procedural hesitation. He wants them to declare him the lawful tenant and physically remove the unstable trespasser. Richard stops barking at the movers and walks over to stand behind his son, puffing his chest out. He glares at the carriage house, ready to watch the local police do his dirty work. The movers stand on the metal ramp of their truck, pausing their labor to watch the unfolding drama. It is time to enter the stage. On Friday, I presented Blair with a disheveled, paranoid wreck. Today, I am the senior actuary. I step away from the window and inspect my reflection in the full-length mirror. I wear a tailored navy wool suit, the lines sharp and uncompromising. My hair is pulled back into a severe, sleek knot. I carry a slim black leather folio tucked under my arm. I look like a woman who commands boardrooms, dissects corporate liabilities, and fires executives before lunch. I do not look like a psychiatric emergency. I disengage the deadbolt. The heavy door swings open, letting the morning sunlight flood the dark hallway. I step onto the gravel path. The crunch of my low heels immediately draws their attention. The two officers turn toward me. Their posture shifts instantly. Their hands drop to rest casually near their heavy-duty belts. It is a subtle, instinctual movement, preparing for the unpredictable behavior Julian just described. Julian sees me, and his eyes widen for a fraction of a second. He expected the sobbing, messy woman from Friday. He expected someone who would scream, throw accusations, and validate his story of mental collapse. Instead, he sees a glacier. He quickly recovers, pointing at me with renewed theatrical outrage. "There she is!" he yells, his voice pitching higher. "Get her off my property before she hurts someone!" I do not walk faster. I do not slow down. I maintain a steady, measured pace until I reach the edge of the paved driveway, stopping a respectful distance from the cruisers. The smell of diesel exhaust from the moving trucks mixes with the salt air. I look at the older officer, offering a polite, composed nod. "Good morning, officers," I say, my voice calm, modulated, and entirely devoid of panic. "My name is Kaylee Collins. I understand there is a dispute regarding the occupancy of this parcel." The older officer studies my face, contrasting my icy professionalism with Julian's frantic sweating. The younger officer looks down at the forged lease in his hand, then back up at me. The tension in the driveway is a physical weight. Julian crosses his arms in a smug, victorious grin stretching across his face. He believes the stamped paper in the officer's hand is his checkmate. He thinks the game is over. He has no idea the board he is playing on ceased to exist on Friday afternoon. The listener holds their breath, waiting to see how I will counter a notarized lie. The older Westport officer raises a gloved hand, signaling for me to halt. "Ma'am, I need you to stay right where you are," he instructs, his tone firm. He reaches toward his shoulder radio, clearly preparing to request backup or initiate a medical evaluation protocol. Julian shifts his weight, crossing his arms over his chest. His posture radiates unearned triumph. He looks at me down the length of the driveway, his lips curling into a mocking sneer. He thinks he has orchestrated the perfect checkmate. He believes the badge and the uniform standing between us are his personal private security force, ready to haul me away in an ambulance. I do not speak. I do not defend myself. I stand on the gravel, the morning breeze pulling a loose strand of hair across my cheek. I am watching the clock. Before the older officer can unclip his radio, the ambient noise of the coastal morning is swallowed by a deep, synchronized mechanical roar. It does not come from a single engine. It is the heavy uniform growl of a fleet. Turning their heads, the two local patrolmen look toward the entrance of the estate. Julian drops his arms, the sneer faltering into confusion. Richard stops yelling at the movers, his jaw going slack. A convoy of 4 black utility vehicles turns off the main road, their tires crushing the gravel as they surge onto the property. They move with coordinated, aggressive precision. Following closely behind them is a large white utility van bearing the insignia of a commercial security and locksmith firm. The driveway is already congested with Richard and Helen's 3 freight trucks. The incoming fleet does not politely wait on the shoulder. They fan out across the width of the entrance, effectively boxing in the moving company. The black vehicles park at sharp angles, creating an impenetrable barricade of tinted glass and polished steel. The delivery drivers standing on the metal ramps of their trucks murmur to each other, sensing a sudden shift in liability. The doors of the lead vehicle open. Silas steps onto the driveway. He wears a bespoke charcoal suit that absorbs the morning light. He does not look like a man arriving for a residential dispute. He looks like a corporate executioner. He is flanked by 3 asset managers from Apex Recovery Centers, all dressed in sharp, identical business attire, carrying thick leather portfolios. Stepping out of the second vehicle is a tall man in a tan uniform. He is not local patrol. He wears the badge and heavy-duty belt of the Fairfield County Sheriff's Department. His presence shifts the jurisdiction of the conflict from a local nuisance call to a county-level property enforcement. Julian stares at the incoming tide of corporate authority, his face draining of its flushed red color, fading into a sickly, chalky white. He takes a step backward, bumping into the side of the police cruiser. He does not know who these people are, but predators always recognize when a larger predator enters the territory. From the white utility van, two technicians emerge wearing heavy canvas work belts. They do not pause to ask for permission. They march straight toward the stone pillars of the front gate. One of them pulls a heavy cordless drill from his holster. A loud metallic clack echoes across the lawn as the technician effortlessly disables the electronic keypad. He pulls the plastic housing away, severing the wires. The gate, which Julian believed he controlled, is now permanently locked in the open position, stripped of its residential function. Blair bursts through the front door of the Colonial, drawn outside by the noise of the fleet. She is wearing a silk robe, clutching the collar tight around her neck. Her bare feet slap against the porch boards. She stops dead when she sees the barricade of black vehicles and the men in suits marching up her driveway. She looks at Julian, her eyes wide, with a sudden, freezing panic. Julian has no answers for her. He attempts to salvage his illusion of control. He steps away from the local police, puffing out his chest, and marches toward Silas. "Excuse me," Julian barks, his voice trembling slightly despite his effort to project authority. "This is a private residence. We are in the middle of a police investigation. You need to turn your vehicles around and get off my leased property right now." Silas does not slow his pace. He does not even blink. He treats Julian with the exact same level of regard one might give a discarded piece of trash on a sidewalk. Silas walks right past him, the tailored shoulder of his suit brushing against Julian's jacket, pushing the younger man aside without a single word. The dismissal is surgical. It strips Julian of his status instantly. Silas stops in front of the two Westport patrol officers. The county sheriff steps up beside him, hooking his thumbs into his duty belt. The visual hierarchy is established without a single raised voice. "Gentlemen," Silas says, his voice a smooth, resonant baritone that commands immediate attention. "My name is Silas. I am the senior managing partner representing Apex Recovery Centers." He gestures toward the three asset managers standing silently behind him. "My clients are the sole legal proprietors of this parcel," Silas continues, his tone crisp and efficient. "We are here to secure the premises and take physical possession of our commercial asset." The younger Westport officer frowns, holding up the crumpled piece of paper Julian gave him minutes ago. "Sir, we were called to a domestic disturbance. This gentleman provided a notarized residential lease. He claims to be the lawful tenant." Silas does not argue. He reaches into his leather briefcase. He does not pull out a single sheet of paper downloaded from the internet. He withdraws a thick, bound legal folio stamped with the official seal of the state of Connecticut and the federal tax identification numbers of a billion-dollar healthcare conglomerate. He hands the heavy document to the older officer. "You are holding a fraudulent document," Silas states, pointing a manicured finger at Julian's fake lease. "The property you are currently standing on underwent a corporate acquisition on Friday afternoon. The equity transfer is finalized. The funds have cleared escrow. The title is recorded." The older officer opens the folio. His eyes scan the dense legal text, the corporate signatures, and the undeniable proof of commercial ownership. He looks up at the sprawling colonial house, then down at the forged paper in his partner's hand. Silas delivers the killing blow. "This property is no longer zoned for residential use," Silas explains, his voice echoing across the quiet driveway. "It is a commercial healthcare facility. Residential tenancy laws, eviction moratoriums, and squatter protections do not apply here. The men standing on that porch are not tenants. They are unauthorized individuals loitering on a corporate job site." The younger officer looks at Julian. The professional courtesy vanishes from the policeman's eyes, replaced by the hard, suspicious glare reserved for criminals who attempt to manipulate law enforcement. Julian realizes his shield has evaporated. The forged lease, the backdated notary stamp, the months of whispering and plotting in the dark, it all shatters against the impenetrable wall of corporate law. He opens his mouth to speak, but no words come out. He looks at Blair, who is shivering on the porch, her face pale and terrified. Richard steps forward, his face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. He realizes his moving trucks are trapped. He realizes his promised mansion is a mirage. "This is a trick," Richard yells, pointing a thick finger at me. "She is trying to steal our home. We have rights. We get mail here." Silas turns slowly to face Richard. The corporate attorney adjusts his cuffs, projecting a lethal, quiet calm. He looks past Richard, locking his predatory gaze onto Julian, who is practically vibrating with fear. "You do not have rights," Silas corrects him, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have exactly 60 minutes. The timer has started. The trap is closed. The listener anticipates the brutal, systematic dismantling of the parasites, waiting to hear what consequences await the man holding a forged legal document in front of 3 police officers. Silas lets the 60-minute deadline hang in the salt-tinged morning air. The silence on the driveway is profound, broken only by the low rumble of the idling freight trucks. Richard stares at the corporate attorney, his jaw working as his mind struggles to comprehend the sudden evaporation of his stolen kingdom. He spent his entire adult life playing the victim, blaming the system for his failures, and now the system is parked on the front lawn, wearing bespoke wool and backed by county law enforcement. Julian refuses to surrender. His ego will not allow him to process defeat in front of an audience. He lunges forward, bypassing Silas, and shoves his crumpled piece of paper directly toward the chest of the Fairfield County Sheriff. "Look at the stamp," Julian demands, his voice cracking, high and desperate. He points a shaking finger at the embossed seal on the bottom corner of the page. "It is notarized. It is a legally binding contract. You cannot just kick us out. We have a valid lease. I am the primary tenant. She is breaking the law." The sheriff does not flinch. He does not take the paper. He looks down at Julian with the weary, hardened gaze of a man who has spent 20 years dealing with desperate liars. Silas steps smoothly between them, intercepting the space. A slow, terrifying smile spreads across the attorney's face. It is not a smile of amusement. It is the bared teeth of a predator closing its jaws around a trapped animal. Silas sets his slim leather briefcase onto the hood of the nearest police cruiser. The metal clasps open with 2 sharp simultaneous clicks. He reaches inside, bypassing the thick corporate folios and the printed property deeds. Instead, he retrieves a single folded piece of white paper. He holds it up by the corner, letting the morning breeze catch the edge. "Do you recognize this, Mr. Pierce?" Silas asks, his tone dropping to a conversational, deadly murmur. I watch from the edge of the driveway, maintaining my clinical detachment. I recognize the document instantly. It is the past due collection notice for the premium television and fiber optic internet package. I pulled that envelope out of a wicker wastebasket in my ruined home office weeks ago. It was the initial breadcrumb of Julian's parasitic strategy, and now it is loaded with federal ammunition. Julian squints at the paper. His chest heaves with shallow, ragged breaths. It is a utility bill. Julian stammers, trying to project defiance but sounding only like a cornered child. "It proves I live here. It proves I established residency." Silas nods slowly, folding the paper in half. "It proves you opened a line of credit using a residential address you do not own, under the pretense of a lease that did not exist when the account was activated." Julian swallows hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He glances at Blair, who is shrinking back against the wooden pillars of the front porch, pulling her silk robe tighter around her shoulders. She offers him no support. She is watching the illusion of her powerful, protective boyfriend dissolve into pathetic desperation. You see Julian Silas continues pacing slowly across the gravel, addressing the entire audience. Kaylee is a senior actuary. She calculates risk for a living. When she suspected you were compromising her physical perimeter, she did not argue with you. She quantified the threat. She installed a closed-circuit, high-definition audio-visual network throughout the primary residence. The color drains entirely from Julian's face. His eyes dart toward the sweeping windows of the colonial house, suddenly seeing invisible lenses hidden in every corner. Silas lets the revelation sink into the quiet morning. We have pristine, time-stamped footage of everything he says, his voice echoing off the brick facade. We have the footage of you sitting in the dining room last night, emptying powdered sedatives into a plastic bag, plotting to drug Kaylee and initiate a fraudulent psychiatric hold. We have the audio of you explaining how to bypass the probate court. Helen lets out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with her hand. She looks at her son, horror dawning in her eyes. She knew Julian was greedy, but she did not realize he was orchestrating a chemical assault. Richard steps back, creating a physical distance between himself and his son, the bluster draining from his posture. But that is a matter for the local district attorney, Silas says, dismissing the psychiatric plot with a flick of his wrist. I am a corporate lawyer. My concern is the financial integrity of my client's asset. And that brings us back to this notarized lease. Silas gestures to the document still trembling in Julian's grip. We also possess the security footage of you making a phone call on the back patio yesterday morning. Silas explains, his tone surgical and precise. We recorded your conversation with a named Marcus. We heard you discuss downloading a boilerplate template from the internet. We heard you agree to pay him $100 to backdate the embossed seal by 2 months. Julian drops his arm. The forged lease flutters from his fingers, landing face down on the dusty gravel. His knees visibly buckle, but he forces himself to remain standing. When you combine a forged residential contract with an unauthorized utility account opened through the United States Postal Service, Silas concludes, the legal landscape shifts dramatically. You are no longer dealing with a simple civil trespass violation. You have crossed the threshold into federal jurisdiction. Silas steps closer to Julian, lowering his voice so only the immediate circle can hear the final calculation. That is federal mail fraud, Mr. Pierce. That is identity theft. Those are felony charges carrying mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. If I hand this folder to the federal prosecutor, you will not spend the next 5 years enjoying a coastal view. You will spend them in a federal penitentiary. The silence that follows is profound. The ocean breeze stops. The diesel engines of the freight trucks seem to hum at a lower frequency. Julian looks at the older Westport patrol officer, seeking any sign of procedural salvation. The officer crosses his arms, shaking his head slowly, stepping back to indicate he will not intervene on behalf of a suspected felon. The local authorities recognize an airtight corporate execution when they see one. Silas reaches down, picks up the forged lease from the gravel, and places it neatly inside his leather briefcase. He snaps the clasps shut. The sharp clicks sound like the locking mechanism of a prison cell. Apex Recovery Centers is a generous organization, Silas announces to the assembled group. We prefer a clean transition of our assets. Therefore, we are offering you a narrow window of grace. If every single unauthorized individual, along with those 3 freight vehicles, is off this corporate property within 1 hour, I will leave this briefcase in my trunk. The footage remains archived. Silas points a manicured finger directly at Julian's chest. But if I see your face, your father's face, or a single piece of your cheap furniture on this asphalt when that timer expires, I will hand the unredacted digital drives to the sheriff, and I will personally ensure the federal indictments are drafted before noon. Blair lets out a choked, terrified sob. She turns and sprints into the house, her bare feet pounding against the hardwood floors, driven by the primal instinct to flee a burning structure. Helen follows her frantic, her hands trembling so badly she struggles to grip the brass door handle. Julian stands frozen, a statue of ruined hubris. His entire reality has been dismantled in less than 5 minutes. He looks at me standing quietly on the edge of the driveway. He expects to see gloating. He expects a triumphant smile. I give him nothing. I look at him with the same detached observation I reserve for a corrected spreadsheet error. Richard grabs Julian by the shoulder, his thick fingers digging into the expensive fabric of the jacket. "Move!" Richard snarls, his voice laced with venom and panic. "Get inside and pack, now!" The father shoves the son toward the porch steps. The illusion of their powerful dynasty crumbles into a desperate, scrambling retreat. The Fairfield County Sheriff steps forward. He looks at the retreating figures, then turns his gaze to the freight drivers, who are already climbing back into their cabs, eager to distance themselves from the impending arrests. The sheriff raises his left arm, pulling back the cuff of his tan uniform shirt to expose a heavy steel chronograph watch. He taps the glass face of the watch with his index finger. The sound is sharp, hollow, and final. "Your hour starts right now," the sheriff calls out. The countdown begins, and the listener is pulled forward, eager to witness the frantic, humiliating scramble of the parasites as they realize their stolen kingdom has transformed into a high-speed ticking bomb. The Fairfield County Sheriff lowered his arm. The gesture was a starting gun for the most humiliating scramble I have ever witnessed. Inside the colonial house, the illusion of the Pierce dynasty disintegrated. The frantic, uncoordinated sounds of their retreat echoed through the open front doors. Footsteps pounded against the hardwood floors. Doors slammed against their frames. Voices, stripped of their arrogant polish, barked panicked instructions at one another. They were no longer the confident conquerors staking a claim on a coastal estate. They were cornered prey fleeing a sinking ship. Helen emerged onto the stone porch first. She carried an overloaded cardboard box, her narrow shoulders hunched under the weight. In her haste, she had failed to secure the bottom flaps. The cardboard buckled under the strain. A ceramic coffee mug, one she had presumptuously unpacked just hours ago, slipped through the gap. It hit the Italian marble of the foyer and shattered. The sharp, violent crack of breaking porcelain rang out across the lawn. Helen froze. She stared at the jagged white shards scattered across my floor. She did not kneel to clean the mess. She burst into a sudden hysterical fit of tears, dropping the rest of the box, and ran toward the moving trucks. The contracted freight drivers refused to assist with the evacuation. Silas had made the legal boundaries perfectly clear. Aiding unauthorized individuals in removing property from a secured corporate facility carried secondary liability risks. The movers stood near the cabs of their trucks, arms crossed over their chests, watching the Pierces do their own heavy lifting. Julian and Richard dragged a bulky, faux leather recliner out the front door. They struggled with the awkward frame, their faces red, their breathing ragged in the morning air. They bumped the heavy chair against the pristine white door jamb, leaving a dark, ugly scuff mark on the wood. Richard dropped his side of the chair. It hit the porch boards with a dull thud. He turned on his son, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. "You told me this was handled," Richard roared, spit flying from his lips. "You told me she was weak. You said she was handing over the deed. You forged a federal document and dragged your mother and me into a felony investigation. We sold our condo for this delusion? We have nowhere to go." Julian backed away, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of defense. "I did not know she had a corporate trust," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "How was I supposed to know she liquidated the holding company?" "You are a fool," Richard spat, his disgust palpable and unfiltered. "You ruined us. Get the rest of these boxes before that sheriff puts us in handcuffs." The loyalty among thieves is notoriously fragile. The moment the prize evaporated, the Pierces turned their venom inward. They shoved their cheap furniture back into the yawning dark maws of the freight trailers. They threw boxes haphazardly, breaking their own belongings in the rush to escape the federal guillotine hanging over their heads. Amidst the chaos, Blair stood on the lawn. She was still wearing the silk robe, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist to ward off the coastal chill. She watched the Pierce family tear themselves apart. She watched Richard scream at Julian. She watched Helen throw a suitcase into the back of a sedan without checking to see if Blair had anything to pack. The harsh truth materialized before her eyes. The Pierces did not love her. They did not view her as family. She was merely the key they used to unlock the estate. Now that the locks were changed and the doors were sealed, the key was entirely useless to them. They were leaving her behind. Blair realized she had no home. She had no money. The bank accounts were frozen. The colonial estate was a corporate medical facility. The carriage house was locked. She was standing on the grass with nothing but the clothes on her back. She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the driveway, until she found me. I remained standing near the barricade of black utility vehicles, watching the evacuation with the detached scrutiny of an auditor observing an inventory count. Blair took a hesitant step forward, then another. Her bare feet dragged across the gravel. The defiant, mocking sister from the dining room was gone. The weeping victim from the internet manifesto was gone. The woman approaching me was stripped down to the bare, terrified core of her own consequences. "Kaylee," she whimpered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide and wet. "Kaylee, please." She stopped 3 feet away from me. She looked up, searching my face for the familiar, predictable softness she had exploited her entire life. She searched for the older sister who always fixed her mistakes, who always paid the bills, who always absorbed the pain to keep the peace. "You cannot do this," Blair sobbed, the tears spilling over her cheeks. "Where am I supposed to go? I have nothing. Julian lied to me. He used me. You are my sister. You have to help me. Our parents would never want you to leave me on the street. Please." "I am sorry. I will do whatever you want." I looked at her. I felt the ocean breeze stir the loose strands of her hair. I felt the warmth of the morning sun on my shoulders. I searched my own chest for the guilt that used to govern my decisions, the heavy, suffocating obligation of blood. The ledger was empty. "Blair," I said, my voice steady, cool, and devoid of malice, "I am not angry with you. Anger requires emotional investment, and I closed your account weeks ago." She blinked, confused by the clinical tone. "What are you talking about?" I adjusted the leather folio under my arm. "Did you truly believe I allowed a stranger to move into my home without running a comprehensive background check?" Blair stared at me, her breath catching in her throat. "I investigated Julian the morning after he first stayed the night." I explained, laying out the data with methodical precision. I paid a private corporate intelligence firm. I knew about his 3 prior evictions in Rhode Island. I knew about the civil fraud judgments against his shell companies in New Jersey. I knew exactly what kind of predator he was the moment he walked through the foyer. "Then why did you let him stay?" Blair asked, her voice a fragile, broken whisper. "Why did you not warn me?" "Because you would not have listened," I replied smoothly. "You would have accused me of sabotage. You would have defended him to the bitter end. You were a chronic liability, Blair. You drained my resources, manipulated my grief, and weaponized our parents' memory to fund your delusions. You were a leak in the hull of my life." I took a single step closer to her, ensuring she heard every syllable of the final equation. "In risk management," I continued, "you cannot always patch a leak. Sometimes the structural damage is too severe. To save the vessel, you must amputate the flooded compartment. I needed a catastrophic event to legally and morally sever my ties to you forever. I needed you to cross a line so unforgivable that society, the law, and the extended family could never demand my compliance again." Blair shook her head, the realization horrifying her. "Julian was not a mastermind," I said, "delivering the ultimate truth. He was a controlled variable. I let him in. I let him scheme. I let him forge documents and steal groceries. I gave him the rope, and I watched him tie the noose around both of your necks. You wanted him to be the man of the house? Now you can share his federal record." The color drained from her face. The betrayal she felt was a mirror reflecting her own actions back at her. She realized she had not been outsmarted today. She had been outsmarted on day 1. Every moment of her perceived victory had been a carefully calibrated stage in my actuarial trap. Blair opened her right hand. The heavy iron keys to the estate, the keys she had proudly paraded around for months, slipped from her trembling fingers. They hit the gravel with a dull, heavy clank. She looked down at the keys resting in the dirt. She did not reach for them. She understood they belonged to a door that no longer existed. A sleek black town car pulled into the driveway, gliding smoothly past the chaotic loading zone of the freight trucks. Silas had arranged the private transport through the corporate acquisition budget. The driver stepped out, moving with crisp professionalism, and opened the rear passenger door for me. I looked at Blair one last time. I did not offer her money. I did not offer her a hotel room. I did not offer her an apology. "Goodbye, Blair," I said. I turned away from her weeping figure. I stepped into the cool, leather-lined interior of the town car. The door shut behind me, sealing out the noise of the idling trucks, the shouts of the Pierces, and the sobbing of my sister. I pressed the button on the armrest. The tinted glass window rolled up in a smooth, silent glide. The driver shifted the vehicle into gear. We pulled away from the coastal colonial estate, leaving the ruins of the ambush behind. I sat in absolute silence, watching the scenery pass by, feeling the profound, unbreakable peace of a woman who had finally balanced the ledger. The story demanded one final resolution, an epilogue to confirm the precise cost of crossing the quiet actuary. 365 days have passed since the Fairfield County Sheriff tapped the glass face of his watch. A single year is a fascinating unit of measurement. In the actuarial field, we use annual reports to track the long-term consequences of catastrophic failures. The 12 months following the eviction on the gravel driveway provided a flawless case study in the mathematics of hubris. The manufactured dynasty of the Pierce family collapsed the moment they were forced off the corporate property. Richard and Helen discovered that selling their modest condo to chase the illusion of a luxury mansion was a fatal miscalculation. Without a home, their financial reserves rapidly depleted through panicked extended stays at budget motels and desperate consultations with defense attorneys. They face the unforgiving reality of the Connecticut housing market with ruined credit and zero leverage. Eventually, they signed a lease for a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of Bridgeport. The unit features thin walls, a rattling heating system, and a scenic view of a 24-hour shipping depot. The air smells constantly of diesel exhaust. They complain to their landlord relentlessly about the peeling paint and the noise. The property management company ignores their calls, cashing their monthly rent checks with mechanical efficiency. The name on their lease agreement is Horizon Holdings. Horizon Holdings is a blind shell corporation. I am the sole managing director. Every 30 days, Richard and Helen deposit a fraction of their dwindling retirement funds directly into my corporate portfolio. They are financing my investments. They will never know they are paying my mortgage. Julian did not fare any better. When Silas forwarded the unredacted security footage and the forged lease to the postal inspector, the federal machinery activated. Faced with felony mail fraud and identity theft indictments, Julian abandoned his arrogant bluster. He turned state evidence against the corrupt notary who stamped the document, accepting a plea deal that included a substantial fine and a lengthy probationary period. The felony conviction ruined his freelance consulting aspirations. The moment the legal pressure mounted, he packed a duffel bag and fled across state lines, leaving his parents to drown in the financial ruin he orchestrated. He also abandoned my sister, without a single word of farewell. Which brings the equation back to Blair. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I visit a premium organic grocery market in downtown Westport. The store smells of roasted espresso beans and fresh artisan bread. I wear a tailored camel hair coat and soft leather gloves. I select crisp organic produce, a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir, and a bouquet of white lilies. I place my items on the black conveyor belt. The cashier scans the barcodes. Standing at the end of the checkout lane is an employee wearing a stiff green polyester apron. Her name tag hangs slightly crooked on her chest. She reaches for a brown paper sack to bag my groceries. It is Blair. She looks up and the barcode scanner emits a sharp, high-pitched beep. The color drains entirely from her cheeks. The past 12 months have extracted a heavy toll. The entitlement and the manufactured fragility are gone. They have been replaced by the exhausted, hollow stare of someone working a minimum wage retail shift just to survive. She once claimed my financial discipline suffocated her boundless potential. Her potential is now quantified by how quickly she can sort bruised apples from canned goods without tearing the paper sack. I do not flinch. I do not offer a warm smile. I simply watch her hands tremble as she carefully places the wine bottle into the bag. She avoids my gaze, her posture shrinking under the harsh fluorescent lights of the supermarket. "Would you like assistance carrying these to your vehicle?" the cashier asks, reciting the mandatory store protocol. "Yes," I reply, my voice smooth and even. "Thank you." Blair swallows hard. She gathers the heavy paper bags, hugging them to her chest, and walks out the sliding glass doors into the damp afternoon air. I follow her across the paved lot. The silence between us is a physical barrier thick and impenetrable. We reach my sleek, dark sedan. I press the button on my key fob. The trunk opens with a quiet click. Blair leans forward and places the groceries inside. She steps back, wiping the rain from her forehead. She lingers for a fraction of a second. Her eyes flick up to meet mine. I see the desperate silent plea pooling in her gaze. She is waiting for an opening. She is waiting for the older sister to break the ice, to offer a lifeline, to invite her out of the cold and fix her mistakes one last time. I reach into my leather handbag. I pull out my wallet and extract a single, crisp $1 bill. I hold the paper currency out toward her. The green ink stands out sharply against the gray afternoon. "Keep the change, say." Blair stares at the dollar bill. The final shred of her pride shatters. She takes the money, her fingers brushing against my leather glove, and lowers her head. I close the trunk step into the driver's seat and pull out of the parking lot, leaving her standing in the rain, clutching a single dollar. The ledger is officially closed. The drive back to Stamford is peaceful. I take the private elevator up to the top floor of my high-rise building. The polished steel doors slide open, revealing my penthouse sanctuary. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic view of the city skyline, the thick glass insulating the space from the noise of the streets below. I walk into the spacious modern kitchen. Hector sits at the granite island nursing a cup of dark roast coffee. He wears a crisp corporate uniform bearing the logo of Apex Risk Management. He oversees the entire groundskeeping division for the corporate campus now. He is thriving, respected, and financially secure. He smiles when I enter the room, offering a warm, genuine greeting. We discuss the new landscaping proposals for the corporate courtyard. There is no tension here. There is only mutual respect and earned loyalty. I pour myself a glass of water and walk into the grand foyer of the penthouse. Standing in the corner, contrasting beautifully with the sleek modern architecture, is my father's antique grandfather clock. I instructed Silas to have a specialized moving team retrieve it from the carriage house before the corporate buyers took physical possession of the Westport estate. I trace my fingers over the polished walnut. The brass pendulum swings in a steady, hypnotic arc. The mechanical heartbeat is restored. The rhythm is strong, grounding the space in order and certainty. I turn my gaze toward the sweeping windows, watching the city lights begin to flicker against the twilight. The flood came just as I calculated it would. The parasites tried to weaponize my grief and steal the foundation of my life. They expected noise. They expected a chaotic emotional surrender. Instead, they encountered an actuary. I did not yell at the water. I built a channel, redirected the current, and watched the threat wash itself away into the drains of their own hubris. This is my story. It is a testament to the quiet power of a fortified perimeter. When the manipulators in your life attempt to breach your walls, do not hand them the satisfaction of your anger. Do not negotiate with entitlement. Stand firm. Build your boundaries with silence. Gather your evidence in the shadows. Secure your paperwork. Protect the people who demonstrate true loyalty, and let the trash take itself out. Thank you for listening to Pana Vengeance. If you value composure over chaos, and if you believe that the best revenge is a quiet, devastating legal maneuver, leave a comment below and subscribe to the channel. I will see you in the next case file.